Welcome back to our next panel, which will talk about delivering electricity grid of the future, flexibility, building out the infrastructure, facilitating renewable energy growth, and all of those good things. So welcome our panel.
Thank you. Great, thank you. So, you can hear me. So welcome and thank you to this session. My name's John Davies, Director of Network Operation at National Grid's Electricity Transmission. And in my role, I'm responsible for the day-to-day operation of the transmission system in England and Wales today. So this is a topic which is hugely of interest for me. So I'm joined on the panel by Hayley, Randolph, Laura, and Boni, and I'll leave them to introduce themselves in a second. The panel's made up of different parts of the electricity ecosystem, shall we say? So that'll be a really good rounded discussion that we can have on the topic. The way that we're going to run this session is that we're all going to share 2 or 3 minutes from our own perspectives of what this challenge means of delivering the energy system of the future, and then we'll get into a bit more of a deeper discussion around what that means. And I know a few people are scanning the code so that I've got the iPad here and we'll pick up any of the questions that come through from the audience as we go. So without further ado, we'll kick off. So if I head straight to the end and work back. So Randolph, over to you.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Cool. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Randolph. I'm Global Head of Clean Power Systems at HSBC. So it's great to be here today. I actually just came from the financing forum upstairs, and they started talking about grids, the role of the smart grid, the role of clean technologies, in the energy transition. So it's great to see that this is clearly the most important session. What are we doing here at HSBC? So we are very much committed to net zero. We've committed to net zero for our own operations by 2030 and for our financed emissions due to the activity of our clients by 2050. We've also set interim targets for 2030 for a range of different sectors, including for the power and utilities sector, very much based on science-based targets from the IEA. However, it's not just about targets. We've set a range of different policies and plans to support that, including our net zero transition plan, which we released a couple of months ago, which is where we break up the economy into different sectors and say how those sectors need to get to net zero and what our role is as financiers in helping them deliver that. And finally, on the finance side, we've committed up to $1 trillion out to 2030 to support our clients in the rollout and scale up of sustainable and clean technologies. Specifically with respect to the electricity system, according to BNEF, clean electrification is going to do most of the heavy lifting. 71% of the abatement by 2050 is going to happen as a result of clean electrification. And what they mean by that is electricity generated by renewable and low carbon sources, transmitted over the transmission and distribution grid, and then electrified demand actually using that electricity. So it's critical. And grids are a key component of that, arguably the center or spine of that. Again, according to BNEF, they've said that $21.4 trillion needs to be invested in the grid between now and 2050 to get to net zero. So what are we doing at HSBC to help different companies? We're lending to utilities. We're doing project finance, both for renewables and the grid itself. One of the cool projects we worked on fairly recently was the longest HVDC transmission line in Latin America, in Chile, connecting the north of the country, where there's lots of good solar resource, to the center, which is where a lot of the electrical demand is. We're supporting the supply chain and trying to unblock some of the supply chain in the clean electricity space. Just did a green loan for £100 million with JDR Cables, for example, who'd manufacture subsea cables for connection of interconnectors and offshore wind farms as well. And finally, we're supporting the sort of innovation and climate tech space. So you would have heard last year that we bought Silicon Valley Bank UK, now branded HSBC Innovation, where we're supporting climate tech companies right down to pre-seed, offering them a range of different products throughout their lifetime, including things like venture debt, where we've committed £1 billion in the UK. So we're sort of supporting everyone across the clean electricity space. We believe in taking a whole systems approach, and we believe that there's different products that are going to be required for different parts of the system. So great to be here and really looking forward to the panel.
Brilliant. Thanks, Randolph. Just check in. Everyone can hear me okay? Perfect. So hi, everyone. I'm Hayley Burden. So I work at National Grid Electricity Distribution. So NGED owns and operates the local network that delivers electricity to people's homes and businesses. For those who don't know, NGED is the biggest distribution network by geography. So we serve 25 million customers across the East and West Midlands, the South West, and into South Wales. The expectation of distribution networks has changed considerably over the last few years. Of those 25 million customers, they don't just expect us to now keep the lights on. They also expect us to charge their EVs, power their heat pumps, and keep their Wi-Fi working while they're working at home. We've also seen exponential growth in the number of renewable technologies that want to connect to the local grid. In the last 5 years, we've connected many more renewable technologies, and today the pipeline waiting to connect to the local grid for NGED is 46 gigawatts. And just to put a bit of context around that, 5 years ago we used to have 700 connection applications per month. We now get 7,000 per month. So this change in distributed generation means our network now needs to behave differently compared to how it did before. So previously, distribution networks have been very linear in their operation with a one-way flow of electricity from transmission through to distribution. But this is where the role of the distribution system operator now comes in, which is the part of the business that I work in. So like the electricity system operator at national level, our DSO is working to anticipate future growth. We're developing new flexibility markets and making sure that we're integrating storage, generation, and all of that demand onto the network. This is a really exciting and new way for distribution networks to operate. So what we need to do is think in a different way to maximise the capacity that the grid has today, and also make sure that we plan effectively for the future so that we can continue to connect all of those low-carbon technologies that we're using in our homes and businesses.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. My name is Chileshe. I'm from AtkinsRealis. It's a global engineering company, and I head up the transmission and distribution business. We are an enabler in the sense that we help and provide services to develop and plan for the transmission systems. We work across nuclear, we work across transmission distribution, we work across water utilities. What I wanted to say today is that we're looking across the entire globe, not just in the UK, in terms of how we deliver net zero across the globe. Part of the challenge that we have is how do we get this done at pace, but also try and deliver infrastructure at such a scale that's never been done before. Just as a context to give you an understanding of what we're looking at, just on the national grid side, on the transmission side, what we're trying to do between now and 2030 to 50 is more infrastructure to be developed and delivered than has been delivered in the last 42 years. Adding on to that, we've got resource that's about a third of what they had during those times. So it's a great challenge, not only to deliver the infrastructure, but it's got to be green as well. But also the challenges are you've got to bring that together to ensure that the grid is resilient, but also you are not suffering from interoperability issues by bringing in a mix of generations, which is also a challenge. Having said that, we've also seen a reduction in the number of people in the UK taking up engineering courses. We're getting fewer and fewer graduates wanting to do this sort of thing. Currently, we've got more work than we can deliver with resource. So part of doing this is, it's about how do we deliver at pace, the infrastructure, how do we upskill the people, how do we then also go global, because we're going to need global resources to support this. The other thing that we also need to do is what we're thinking about going green. It's about, you can't just deliver it the way we've always done it. we need to be more innovative and push the boundaries of innovation. But we also have to bring in digital tools to help us deliver this. And we're doing that within AtkinsRealis. For instance, we have a large team in Global Technical Center in Bangalore, and we only need one person to travel to site with VR and digital cameras, 360 degrees, and we have what we call Lava Labs, VR studios in most of our offices. And so the team will sit around there, where normally would have had 30 visits to a site, we now only have 1 or 2, so that reduces your carbon footprint for a start. We're also looking at ways of how do we then bring in new technologies to make the grid smarter. Because what people are looking for in the future is they want plug and play. An example is for people who drive EVs. They get frustrated by going to a charging point and they can't charge because it's a wrong charger at the end of the line. Or someone wants to connect and the process is so convoluted. We're talking about having flexible systems. How do we make that a plug and play? And part of this is about thinking about innovation. It's about thinking about digital tools. So as an enabling company, because we're an engineering company that's global, we operate from Australia all the way to North America. It's about providing solutions to our clients, to our communities, and to the environment. We'll talk a lot more about that, but that's what I wanted to say at the moment. And there's some technologies out there that are quite smart, because one of the things we cannot do is just add infrastructure to infrastructure. We have to find infrastructure that can actually help us deliver more power within the existing infrastructure systems. There are some smart digital devices that can help us do that. Some of that technology is being applied. For instance, Hitachi have got some technologies in that space. National Grid have recently applied some smart valve technologies in the Scottish borders, which has increased capacity of those transmission lines by 1.5 gigawatts. So it's really about how do we embrace the technology, not only on the infrastructure, but in terms of how we deliver the projects, how we train our people. And one of the things we have to do while we embrace all of this is to make sure that we don't create a much bigger gap between our people that are delivering the infrastructure and the digital tools that they're using, because there's always a gap, because technology is advancing at such a pace. We also need to make sure that the people that we've got can be upskilled to understand and deliver the technology, so that one of the things we want to do is the system must be resilient, it must be safe, and it must be sustainable as well. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me as well. Yes. Laura Fleming, I'm the CEO for Hitachi Energy UK and Ireland. And at Hitachi Energy, we're playing a central part in the grid supply chain, providing technology solutions, equipment, and software for the transmission and distribution grids. For example, transformers, switchgear and the like, including HVDC technologies. We supply all the technologies that is needed besides the cables. Okay? And I think maybe a couple of things to focus on today is that the grid that we need is one that needs much greater capacity, and it really needs to be twice the size of what it currently is. And however, and also as you've already heard as well, it needs to be much smarter, and it needs to be a lot more flexible as well. So this is where digitization, in order to deal with the increased complexity that is a result of the increasing level of renewables onto the grid. And that variability and the challenges around that will be managed by digitalization. We're helping at Hitachi Energy to expand the grid by delivering some important ASTI projects, the Accelerated Strategic Transmission Infrastructure projects, for example, on the SSA framework, and hopefully a lot more to come as well. And we're doing a lot at the moment in order to expand our global capacity. So no doubt you'll have all heard, actually, the supply chain is, it's quite busy. And And it's not just the UK that is doing an energy transition at the moment, it's a global thing. And in order to be able to do more than we have ever done before, that supply chain needs to step up in order to be able to produce what it is that we need. The other thing that we're also working on is really to see, okay, how can we support our customers to make the grid smarter? How can we make sure that we don't throw any of the electricity that is being generated away, for example, through battery energy storage and hydrogen? And how do we also make sure that the power that is on the grid is going to be consumed at the best possible way? And there again, we'll be looking at digitalization, but also increasing the reliability, for example, through voltage and frequency support. And then, of course, there's also the topic of cost, because the increased amount of renewables and variable generation will increase the balancing cost to about £8 billion, which is quite a lot. It's roughly the equivalent of about £80 on top of the bills per household. So it's really important that we get on top of that and we manage that going forward very well. So yeah, so those are some of the topics we're working on with our customers, such as yourself. Back to you.
Great, thank you, and thank you everybody for your thoughts. So I'll share a couple of things on my mind, and then we'll get into the discussion around some of those things in a bit more detail. So I've mentioned working for National Grid's electricity transmission, so that's the high voltage transmission system in England and Wales, and some of the things that are on our minds which pick out actually a few of the themes that people have already mentioned. So one thing I'd say is that almost every part of the transmission system needs some form of intervention over the course of the next 10 years. That means that when we're getting access to the system to do that work, it's no longer a luxury, if you like, to say that you can go in and do everything that you need to do in that outage. You need to go in and do everything you must do, recognizing that you may not get that asset back out of service for a period of time. Now, that may sound like a really simple thing, but it changes the way in which you build your investment plans. It changes the way in which you plan your maintenance. It changes the way that you have the conversations with the supply chain and the regulators, etc. So changing the way in which we utilize the access to the network and really campaigning it when we've got that access. And also when we're in there, there's a way in which you can invest in the network to deliver just what you need, or you could invest in capacity for the future. So kind of refer to that as a capacity-rich network that we can build, because the demand profile is going one way as we electrify our economy. So investing when we can get access to the network and investing in capacity so that we're getting ahead of when that connection may be. I think the other thing is digital transformation. It's something that's come up a few times, and it probably means different things to different people. It's meant something different to me over the course of the last 5 years. I think the one thing that I'd say is it's a mindset shift as much as anything else. So I trained as an electrical engineer 20 years ago. I used to run power system studies, used to run CAD models to design new things. But when you think digitally, you think about those things from what are you actually trying to do? What are the data sets that you need to put together to make that happen? And how can you wrap computer modeling and analysis power around that in order to get you your outcome? And I think the other reflection for me is constantly learning. So as we adapt, huge amounts of what I learned when I joined the sector 20 years ago are completely different today. So there's something for us all to keep learning as we progress through the decarbonisation agenda. And I think the last thing that I'd say is that maintaining operability, you can't switch the grid off or reboot it and start again. We need to make sure two things really for me. One, that as the changing demands of people's use of that network changes, we are adapting to that, we're understanding what that looks like, and we're ensuring that our plans are then adapting to that. So I think one thing's for certain, we can set a plan now, but we know that the uses of network will change. We know new technologies will come along. We know weather events will come along, for example. So we always need to keep alive to the fact that we need our plans, yes. We need to head in a direction, yes. But we also need to make sure that we're constantly staying on top of the future operability, sustaining the reliable service that customers expect from the grid, whilst also making sure that our plans and our processes, etc., are all adaptable to make sure we can get where we need to be. So we are bang on time. So we'll launch into, I jotted down a couple of themes to delve into, which we'll do now. This is also a plug at this point to raise any questions. There are a few coming in now, which is great. So the first one then, if we start on the physical grid itself, and maybe I could come to you first, Hayley. Do you mind talking then in practical terms what that transition may mean, and maybe elaborating on some of the things which you're working on to improve the challenge in the connection space?
Yeah, so thanks, John. So I think just to start off, I'll build a little bit on what I was saying before. So from a distribution perspective, the network and how we operate the network has to change, and it is changing due to that increase in demand connections that we're seeing and the renewable generation that's coming on. So we have to operate the network in a way where it's multi-directional, it's smart, it's intelligent, and it's able to bring on and manage those sometimes unpredictable renewable technologies. It's probably fair to say as well that our patterns of how we use electricity are changing. I think historically at a national level, there's always been that predictable pick-up time, maybe in the evening when current goes on or EastEnders goes on. That's not the case anymore, given that we're seeing that increase in electric vehicles, heat pumps, the use of other technologies that are increasing our electricity demand. There's not that kind of stable pattern of demand, so the network has to manage that. I think just to put a little bit more context around that in terms of numbers and what we're seeing at the moment. So from an electric vehicle perspective, NGED has connected more electric vehicles to our network in the last 2 years than we have in any other year. So that means in the last 5 years, we've increased the number of EVs by at least 8 times. There's 8 times more on the network now than there was 5 years ago. And heat pumps are following that similar trajectory in that they are increasing, and there's 3 times more heat pumps on the networks than there was in 2019. So the grid needs to change in several ways to be able to manage that, and I'll pick out 3 key ways. One, it's inevitable. We need to build more network. We need to reinforce the network that we have today so it's reliable. It has the capacity to meet that future demand and the connection of those new technologies in the future, so we can all carry on doing what we do at our homes and in our businesses. In NGED, we're investing 7.5 billion in the network over the next 5 years, and 2.1 billion of that will be for our customer connection projects. The second point I'd like to make is around data, and it echoes some of the comments that have already been made. But to manage that peak electricity demand, we need to understand what's happening at that very much at that local level, right down to what's happening at a street level. So what we've done over the last year is start to roll out increased monitoring equipment right at that local street level at our substations that you'll see kind of where your houses are. We've rolled out over 1,500 monitoring sites this year, and we plan to do 15,000 in the next 4 years. And what that will do, that will give us that data and that intelligence around where the constraints are, where the capacity is, so then we can connect more of those renewable technologies to the network and manage that electricity demand and make sure we're smoothing out that profile. And then the final point I'd like to make is around flexibility. So you'll hear flexibility talked about a lot. I think it was being spoken about in one of the previous sessions. But we need to develop more flexibility services. And by that, I mean the ability to turn up or turn down the amount of demand that's being put on the grid at certain times where there may be a constraint. And I think the opportunity for the industry that I think we're just waking up to at the moment is really on the consumer side and tapping into domestic flexibility. Guy Newey was on before. His team did a report out, I think about 2 weeks ago, which identified that there was, I think, between 125 and 145 gigawatts of domestic flexibility that will be available by 2050. So as an industry, we have to work together to tap into that. NGED has a key role to play in that, alongside flexibility service providers, aggregators and suppliers. And we need to make sure that those flexibility services are easy to access, easy to understand, and also that there's something in it for the end consumer to actually engage with that process.
Great, thanks Hayley. And staying with the theme of the grid then, Laura, if I could come to you then and share your thoughts on some of the things which Hayley's mentioned there kind of can get amplified at a transmission level as well, and that means a need for new and different technologies. Do you mind sharing a few thoughts on where you see the major technology developments heading to support the decarbonised grid?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when we look at what we need to do in order to get to the objectives and the targets, the 2030, 2035, 2050 targets, actually, most of the technology already exists. So actually, technology is not necessarily a barrier now for us in order to be able to get there. Of course, there will be some improvements that can be made, but we can already do what we need to do in order to be able to get there. And most of those technologies are already quite well proven as well. I think the real challenge really is that how we're actually going to deliver the amount of projects that now need to be delivered in good time. So, for example, and I mentioned earlier the ASTI projects, for example. Now we have 2 holistic network development plans. There's 50 projects in that. And how we're actually going to deliver and develop those projects at pace, making sure that for the UK we can get the technology in the country at the right time, because that's important as well. It needs to be at the right time. And we'll probably talk a lot about that a little bit later. And that is really important to allow the grid to be scaled up and to be developed, to allow new renewable generation to come online and to come online in due course. And then the other thing is in terms of the technology and the challenges around that, it can actually also bring some really good opportunities. So, for example, interoperability for HVDC is an example of technology that is still to be fully proven, and it is really needed in order to be able to build the offshore DC meshed grids. But again, also regulation there in order how it is actually going to work, who's going to be responsible for building it, who's going to be responsible for maintaining it and operating it at the end of the day. And all of those issues still need to be worked out. And the UK can't do that alone. We need to do that with the other North Sea partners, if you like. And actually, if we can do that and really achieve interoperability, then it will be more beneficial for the environment, but it will also be much more flexible and also much more cost effective. We already mentioned flexibility, and of course, flexibility is hugely needed. And technologies such as STATCOM, for example, and battery energy storage already exist, but now need to be proven more in terms of its use and the real benefits that they can actually bring, and how we can then adopt them more widely to provide reliable power. And then I think there's an awful lot more to do on storage as well. So, and that's really required to balance out the interseasonal effects, if you like, from renewable generation. So, what happens when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine? And of course, things like hydropower are now very well proven, but other ones such as hydrogen, for example, are still in very early phases of development, but also proving its efficiency and effectiveness in order to generate power at a later stage. And then maybe lastly, it's also the interaction actually between the transmission and the distribution grid, and actually how is that going to evolve as the systems are going to be much more interlinked and interdependent on each other as well, and really looking at how holistically the two systems will be integrated. And I think in general, we need a much better knowledge also of the distribution network and actually some of the challenges that will be arising there from different consumer behavior, from domestic customers as well as business customers, and actually how does that then transpire further up into the distribution and also the transmission grid. So yeah. Just a few things to work through.
Just a couple, yeah. And we'll come back to it. It's such a great point that quite often the technology's there, it's then the commercial and the business models that then need to be there to create the investment certainty. So we'll come back to that one shortly. So just finishing on the theme of the grid then, and Bonnie, if I could come to you and ask if you could elaborate on any thoughts you have on whole systems. And that could either be the integration of transmission distribution, or it could be, and just picking up a question from the audience as well around hydrogen and the role that that can play. So whole systems from a voltage level, but also whole systems from a different fuel perspective.
Yeah, I think one of the things, I don't know if you can hear me, that's better. Yeah, I think you can't look at the grid system in isolation. That would be a mistake. So you've got to look at, what we're doing is we're looking at everything from transmission, hydrogen, battery storage, we're looking at solar, we're looking at wind generation, and this is where some of these interoperability issues arose in the early stages when we were looking at this, and we had to find a way of navigating through that, and I think we have. It's really about what gets us to net zero and what works. And also it's a balance about getting new technologies, getting the right balance, but also making sure that whatever we deliver as a whole system is resilient and it's safe, first and foremost. We are, as part of the enablers, as I said, we are involved across all those patches. We've got a team that looks at hydrogen. We've got a team that looks at solar and battery storage. They all sit under myself. And we're trying to find the balance of getting the whole system approach to all of that. And as I mentioned, it's about plug and play. How do we then get to the point where we enable these systems to be developed and, if you like, built at pace and find what I would call a common platform of how you deliver these, because what you don't want to do is start everything from scratch and then have a disconnected approach to all of it. I don't know whether that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. We may come back to that actually as we get to some of the questions.
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
A little bit further on. So that's great. Thanks. So moving on from the grid then, and Randolph, come to you. So we talked about a number of us talked about the scale of the investment that's needed across the grid. In your opening remarks, you shared some examples of how your organisation is also supporting in that space. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a view from an investment perspective and what that means from policy and a regulation perspective, and where you think that needs to move to, or the certainty that you think you need to create the environment for that investment to come.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. Great questions, by the way, in the Slido. I'm liking them. Policy and regulation is absolutely critical to financing, right? It provides certainty, stability, visibility, and it also can catalyse a lot of investment as well. And I think one thing the UK has been really good at is innovation investment, innovation grants, different funding models, including from the regulator. That is essentially a really key way to pump prime parts of industry, and particularly newer parts in the climate tech space. I think in general, I mentioned a lot of the products that we're offering earlier, but probably one thing I didn't mention is that partnerships between government and private financiers, like a bank like us, is absolutely essential, and that's something that we're focusing on a lot at the moment. So I'll give you a few examples. We have invested $100 million in Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, Bill Gates's venture outfit, that's looking to bring private and public finance together to invest in hard-to-abate sectors. And one of those key sectors, which Laura also mentioned, was long-duration energy storage. So that's one of the areas that they look at, which is obviously critical to the grid. We've also, after COP, joined the International Renewable Energy Agency, I wrote it down here, Transition Accelerator Financing Platform, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's again looking at bringing together private and public players to support investment in renewables and clean technologies. In Singapore, we've set up something called Green Capital, which is a JV. Can you hear me? Sorry, I think it's cutting out. I think I've got like a 10-degree swivel here that I can't move beyond. So Pentagreen's a JV between us and Temasek, the Singaporean sovereign wealth fund, where we're investing in, together, it's a blended finance vehicle, investing in renewables in Southeast Asia that probably wouldn't be purely commercial. We call them marginally bankable projects. So having that policy certainty and having that government support is essential, and that's why we're trying to bring together, and we're trying to work closely with governments and other relevant public players.
That's great, thank you. Okay, so we will now move on to the Q&A that we've got. So Randolph's already had a sneak peek of what's in there. For the others, this will be a bit of a surprise. So we'll start with the most liked question. I think come to yourself first, Hayley, which is views on demand-side flexibility and its proportional role to deliver the future grid, and which technologies and would you invest in them?
Okay, so I think going back to what I was saying before, I think there is a huge opportunity with domestic flexibility that we are just kind of opening our eyes to as an industry. It's a huge innovation opportunity. And if you think around all of the technologies that we're connecting in our homes and our businesses, there's an opportunity to use those flexibly to help the grid in the future. So I think that's where that focus needs to be, is understanding how we can engage those end consumers and businesses into those different markets. We need to create the markets first of all. We've done a lot this year to launch our first domestic consumer flexibility product that we've rolled out and made available to 176,000 households. We've got plans to scale that up and look at different types of products as well. We've also got our Equinox flexibility trial at the moment. So this is where we're working with partners such as Octopus Energy, and we're looking at the commercial viability of heat pumps and using them as a flexible resource in a way that doesn't affect people in terms of their comfort level in their home. So I think it's those types of things that we need to look at as an industry, and I think collaboration is key to making that successful. So it's not just the networks that need to do this. It's, like I said before, it's the suppliers, aggregators, the people that are sitting on this panel today. It is a collaborative effort, and we need to come together and work out how we're going to tackle that. And it needs to be supported by the right policy and regulation as well.
Can I come in on that as well,
Yeah, please
John?
do, yeah.
I completely agree with what Hayley said. I think from the bank's perspective, we've got a whole bunch of startups and small companies that are starting to work in the demand side space, and they're coming up with quite unique and interesting business models to participate in the markets that Hayley just talked about. And hence, from our perspective, we're looking to adapt our product offering to support them. But some of the new models are awesome. One of the biggest barriers to clean technologies, particularly in homes, is the upfront CapEx cost. Yeah. Well, we have clients, and there's different companies that can provide a solution with some of these new technologies for zero CapEx. They're effectively offering like a leasing or energy as a service model, and hence we need to adapt to work with those types of companies, which is exactly why we set up HSBC Innovation. And the second part of the question was on which technology should you invest in. I think look at them all. We need to be technology agnostic. Look at the ones that are cheap, easy, convenient, reliable, sustainable. But they're all on the table. It's a very exciting space.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So working our way down the grid, and I won't come back to Hayley on this one. There's a question on grid connections, and it's a similar theme across transmission and distribution. There's lots of work going on to understand. There is a huge amount of volume in the connection queue. I think last time I checked, the GB connection queue is in the region, combined transmission and distribution of 700 gigawatts. So to put that into perspective, the demand on the network is in the region of 58 gigawatts at a peak level. So there's a huge amount of oversubscription there. So it's about understanding what's the right way of addressing that volume. What is it that is or isn't working in the market that's driving that significant volume of connections. It's about getting the connection process right, and it's about also making sure that as we're developing the connection projects, that we're doing things in a cleverer way. And Hayley mentioned it as well in terms of the concept of plug and play. because for very valid reasons, somebody may not be ready to connect. If that party can't connect, then someone else may be able to come into that space. So, so there's a huge amount that needs to go on in order to do that. And I think the other point, just to reiterate the conversations before around strategic investment in the network, investing ahead of need, and ensuring that we've got the right capacity-rich network to connect. But then also part of the conversation we just had there was about flexibility, because when you've got the right flexibility, you can optimize the use of what we've got there, because that's ultimately what we absolutely want and need to have, is the most appropriate economic and efficient investment in a network so that it can operate to meet the needs. So we've got a question about, which is a well-liked question on operational telecoms and thoughts on where telecoms may need to go to support the grid of the future. And I may come to you, Boni, on this one. You know, it's linked to the data, the digital, what you may be gathering at site, how you may process it. So any thoughts you've got on what maybe a digital transfer of operational information may look like?
Yeah, I think the key thing about digital, it's about the tools and the data and bringing all that together and really using it intelligently because a lot of the data is there and it exists. It's how then you then use that data and apply it intelligently. Just as an example, just thinking about, for instance, customer connections, for instance. One of the challenges is that getting all that data together because, fortunately, we're going to have a queuing management system that's going to help that. But how do you develop a site strategy for a site when you've got various applications coming in at different times and different sets with different requirements? When you've got a site that's designed for a certain constraint and then you've got to look at it almost on an annual basis. So having the data into what I would call I forget the actual word we're using currently in AtkinsRealis, is pulling all that together and make it intelligent so that you've got a one-stop shop and you can actually manipulate the data to help you get to the decisions quickly, but also come to a solution and understand the problem far quicker than you can do. But also what it requires is also the intelligence of you understanding what's there and actually what works, because data for the sake of data and digital, anybody can use data, but if you can't interpret it and understand whether what it's telling you is real or not, you also need to double check that. And that's where the intelligence bit comes in. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So Laura, I'll come to you if that's okay. So you mentioned within your opening remarks about supply chain being a global challenge. Do you mind sharing some thoughts on how you see that playing out and what you think needs to happen in the UK in order to secure the supply chain capacity relative to what may be happening elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is no doubt that there is, a global race on for not just equipment, but also for skills and people at the end of the day. And I think this is also through multiple parts of the supply chain. And I think the UK has got to work very hard in order to be an attractive destination for investment, investment in renewables, but also investment into the grid, and therefore also into skills as a result of all of that. And I think we've made a really good start. As I said, we've got really great ambitions. We've got it written into law. I think politically we've got broad support in order to reach those targets. I think now really is the next step is really to be attractive enough and to be stable enough in order to unlock that long-term development. So I think we've seen something quite interesting over the last 12 to 18 months or so, where we've moved from manage and connect to much more strategic planning, and that over time should be able to unlock the investment that is really required in order to build the supply chains going forward. But at the moment, I have to say, it is not really going fast enough. If we look at other countries, and not just the US, but also other European countries, moving much faster at the moment than the UK is. So I think that is something that we need to be really mindful of. In Hitachi Energy, we are investing already in growing our supply chain. We announced last week $1.5 billion investment in terms of growing the transformer capacity. And this is global, so this will be a huge, huge boost. But more needs to be done than that. And I think we've got a really strong basis to start working from in the UK to meet the ambitious targets. But we really need to increase the confidence that will actually really bring through and deliver on those projects. One of the things that we're doing, for example, with customers is start working much more in programs as opposed to in individual projects, really giving us that visibility across the supply chain that also allows us to secure our supply chain moving forward. And that makes the procurement process in the long term easier, more efficient, more collaborative. But it also allows something much more important, which is standardization. So through that really early engagement and long-term partnership working, we can really see how can we make things simpler and how can we repeat designs as opposed to starting from scratch for every project. And I think that is one of the really key changes that will allow us to start moving much more quickly. And then, of course, there's investment in the UK supply chain as well. So the Giga Fund is very helpful in that respect. Of course, it's not as big and shiny as the IRA system in the US, but I think it is a part of growing the investment in terms of the climate for investment in the UK. So yeah, every little bit helps in that respect. But yeah, a lot to do. I think a lot of positivity around it. We really need to move now from planning into delivering and growing that confidence.
Excellent, thanks. We could keep going on until 14:05. We need to exit stage left, unfortunately, because there's another panel coming through. But that's the sense of the enthusiasm, the opportunity, and the energy that we've got as a panel, and I know you will have as an audience. So thank you to my panelists for joining us in the conversation, and thank you.
Thank you.